My name is Adrian T. Beyer, and I am 34 years old. Jessica's jealousy had always been a low hum in my life, the kind you learn to live with until one day it's loud enough to crack the ceiling. I just didn't expect it to happen at my wedding dinner, the one night that was supposed to be quiet, intimate, and free of drama. My husband and I had just signed the papers at City Hall that morning. No tux, no ceremony, no speeches, just a simple commitment and a modest dinner with family afterward. That was all we wanted, a little calm, a little wine, and a few people to acknowledge that something good had happened. From the moment Jessica walked into the restaurant, I knew it was going to be a problem. She didn't hug anyone, didn't congratulate us, just gave my husband a tight smile that barely lasted a second before she sat down and stared at her phone. Everyone else seemed determined not to notice, or maybe they were used to it. I was. But that night, it felt different. She wasn't just sulking, she was watching. Every compliment aimed at us landed on her like an insult. Every toast made her jaw tighten. When my uncle handed us a card, she rolled her eyes. When my husband's younger sister gave us a handmade gift, Jessica smirked and looked away. It was so blatant, it started to poison the air, and I caught my mother glancing at her more than once, clearly uncomfortable, yet still unwilling to intervene. The breaking point came after dessert. Champagne flutes had just been set down, and my father raised his glass, about to say something kind, when Jessica stood up so abruptly, her chair screeched across the floor. She was holding a full wine glass, and for one suspended second, I thought she might actually toast with us. Instead, she said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "This should have been my celebration." Before anyone could react, she smashed the glass onto the floor. The sound echoed, sharp and final. Then she marched over to the small gift table, mostly cards and one neatly wrapped box, and shoved it over. Cards scattered across the floor. The box split open. Someone gasped. No one moved. My mother rushed to Jessica's side like she was the one who'd been wronged. "She's just overwhelmed," she said quickly, the familiar excuse sliding into place like muscle memory. As if hijacking someone else's wedding dinner was a minor emotional lapse we were all supposed to forgive on the spot. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stood up, and my husband stood with me. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't make a scene. We just walked out. I heard my mother calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I wasn't going to stand there while she rewrote what had just happened like she always did. At home, we sat on the couch in silence. I didn't know how to explain the mix of anger, shame, and exhaustion in my chest. My husband didn't push. After a while, he said quietly, "This is her problem, not yours. You've been carrying her for too long." He was right, and for the first time, I was ready to stop pretending otherwise. That night, after the door closed behind us and the noise of the restaurant faded into nothing, I finally let myself look at the shape of my life without the usual excuses. The rent I'd covered when Jessica needed time, the groceries I'd paid for because she was between things, the emergencies that somehow always landed on my credit card, the $12,000 I'd quietly set aside for her fall tuition, because she promised this time would be different. I wasn't helping her anymore. I was insulating her from consequence, and everyone around me had grown comfortable letting me do it. I opened my laptop and didn't rush. This wasn't anger, it was clarity. Through the building's emergency portal, I revoked my co-signer status on her lease. 2 clicks, confirmation email. Then I logged into the tuition account and canceled the payment authorization. Another confirmation. It felt less like cutting someone off and more like putting something back where it belonged. My husband sat beside me, silent, steady, not telling me what to do, just there. That mattered. At 8 in the morning, the banging started, heavy, frantic, like someone trying to knock a door down with panic alone. I already knew who it was. Jessica stood outside in pajamas, hair wild, phone clenched in her hand like evidence. "You can't do this," she said the moment I opened the door. "I'm not joking. You can't." "I already did," I said, and stepped aside to let her in on one condition. "You can come in to talk, not to yell." She made it 3 steps before exploding. She accused me of ruining her life, of pulling support without warning, of choosing a stranger over my own sister. She said I'd changed, that I used to understand family, as if the night before hadn't been a public demolition of my wedding dinner, as if smashed glass and scattered cards weren't a warning flare screaming that something had to end. She turned toward my husband and pointed like she'd found the villain she needed. "This is because of you," she said. "She never used to be like this. You poisoned her against us." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He said one sentence, calm and precise. "You're not a child. You can figure this out." That was it. That was the line she couldn't cross without consequences. She spiraled. "Family doesn't do this to each other. You'll regret it. You're heartless." She knocked a chair over on her way out and slammed the door hard enough to rattle a frame off the wall. We stood there listening to the echo, the kind that lingers longer than the sound itself. 10 minutes later, my mother called. "Just give her a little time," she said. "She's stressed." I told her I wasn't changing my mind, that I wasn't angry, just done, and that I wasn't interested in hearing another explanation for behavior that had been excused for years. An hour later, both my parents arrived, sitting on our couch like they were staging an intervention. My father spoke more than usual, admitting they were tired too, that they'd been covering some of Jessica's bills without telling me. They didn't want to keep doing it, but they were afraid of what would happen if they stopped. "She's not as strong as you," my mother said. "You've always been the stable one." "Or maybe," I replied, "she's never had to be strong because there was always someone behind her catching the fall." The room went quiet, not angry, just heavy. They left without resolution, and with it, a sense that something in our family had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. That afternoon, my husband made coffee and we sat on the porch. The air felt different, lighter, like a responsibility had been set down. It was the first time in years I didn't feel accountable for everyone else's happiness. I should have known it wouldn't last. That night, a message came from Marcus, Jessica's ex, the same one she'd broken up with months ago. He asked if we could talk, said he needed 15 minutes and wasn't taking sides. I didn't answer right away. By morning, Jessica had sent 6 messages that moved from pleading to guilt to a wordless voice note where she cried for a full minute without saying anything. No apology, no acknowledgement of the dinner, just panic about rent, tuition, and how I was ruining everything. There were 3 missed calls from Marcus, too. Out of curiosity, and because I felt I owed him more than I owed her, I agreed to meet. He was already at the coffee shop, hands wrapped around a black coffee like he hadn't slept. He didn't waste time. "She told me you pulled everything," he said. I nodded. He exhaled and said something that reframed years of noise into one clean sentence. "I tried, I really did, but it was never enough. She didn't want a relationship, she wanted a sponsor." He admitted they'd kept talking after the breakup, that she told him she was going back to school and that I was still paying for everything. He thought all he'd need to cover was groceries and gas. Then he asked the thing he came for. He hoped I'd reconsider the rent. Just that. He couldn't afford the place alone if she moved back in unless someone helped. I said no, not rudely, firmly. He thanked me anyway and left. That was the last I heard from him. By the time I got home, Jessica had shifted tactics. The panic turned into calculated guilt. "You chose a stranger over your own sister," she wrote. "You'll regret this when I disappear from your life forever." I muted her number. When my mother called again and suggested my husband talk to Jessica woman to woman, we both laughed. It felt good to finally hear the absurdity out loud. Then came the quiet, too quiet. The family group chat went dark. Social media posts vanished. Days passed without a new crisis. I let myself believe, briefly, that she might have stopped. The email proved me wrong. It came to my work address from the college's financial aid office, asking me to confirm my financial responsibility for Jessica's fall semester. Attached was a PDF with my name signed at the bottom. The signature wasn't mine. She had forged it. 5 minutes later, the account was flagged and an investigation opened. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was fraud. I didn't tell my husband right away. I forwarded the email to myself and closed my laptop. A few hours later, Jessica texted, "You're really going to leave me with nothing?" I didn't respond. An hour after that, my father knocked. He said she hadn't told them what happened, only that things got worse. Then he added quietly, "She tried to take money from your mother's account. Said it was an accident. We're starting to see things clearer now." I told him about the forged form. He didn't defend her. He just nodded and left. For the first time, they didn't reach for an excuse. By the end of the week, Jessica tried one last escalation, showing up at my husband's office and demanding to see him. Security escorted her out before she made it past the desk. She texted me afterward, "You've turned her into a monster." I didn't answer. Neither did he. That night, we made a decision quietly. We canceled the postponed wedding plans entirely. No ceremony, no reception. We registered our marriage and booked a weekend away, just the two of us. When my husband asked if I was okay being the black sheep for a while, I told him the truth. I already had been. I'd just been too busy paying for it to notice. The silence that followed should have felt like relief, but instead it felt like standing in the aftermath of something big, waiting to see which walls were actually still standing. Jessica vanished from the group chat, from social media, from the constant drip of messages that used to dictate my mornings. For a few days, no one called. No one asked questions. No one tried to mediate. It was unsettling how quickly the family adjusted to not talking about it at all, like if they didn't name the problem, it might stop existing. At home, life was better than it had been in years. My husband and I laughed more. We slept through the night. We made plans that didn't involve calculating how much emotional or financial fallout they might trigger. For the first time since I could remember, my weekends were actually mine. Still, I knew Jessica wasn't done. She had never ended anything quietly in her life. She always needed an audience. The first crack came through extended family. A cousin texted asking if everything was okay between me and Jessica. An aunt posted a vague quote online about forgiveness and blood being thicker than water. No one accused me directly, but no one defended me either. I was becoming the unspoken problem, the one who disrupted the fragile balance by refusing to play my role. Then my mother called again. Her voice was softer this time, tired instead of insistent. She said Jessica had been crying nonstop, that she was scared, that she didn't know how she'd make it through the semester. She asked if I could just help her get through this one last stretch. I told her no. Not angrily, just clearly. There was a long pause on the line, the kind where someone is deciding whether to push or retreat. My mother sighed and said she understood, but the disappointment still leaked through every word. A few days later, my father called. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask me to reconsider. He just talked. He said they were exhausted, that they'd spent years cushioning Jessica from consequences because it was easier than dealing with the fallout. He admitted they were scared of what would happen if everyone stopped catching her. When I asked him why that fear had always outweighed fairness, he didn't have an answer. That was when he told me something that shifted the ground under all of us. Jessica hadn't just forged my signature for tuition. She'd tried to move money out of my mother's account earlier that week, claiming she thought it was hers. My mother caught it in time, but it rattled them. For the first time, they weren't explaining her behavior. They were questioning it. I realized then that my parents weren't villains. They were enablers who had finally run out of excuses. That didn't undo the damage, but it explained why this had gone on for so long. Stability had always been assigned to me because it was convenient. I was the one who could handle it. Jessica was the one who needed protecting. And in protecting her, they had let her become someone they barely recognized. Jessica resurfaced not long after that, but not with me. She showed up at my husband's office unannounced, walked up to the reception desk, and demanded to see him about urgent family business. Security didn't let her pass the lobby. He stayed in his office until she was escorted out. She texted me later, accusing me of turning everyone against her, of destroying her life, of making her look crazy. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We quietly finalized our own plans around that time. We canceled the idea of a postponed celebration altogether. No new invitations. No second chance at a perfect day. We signed the paperwork and booked a weekend away. Just the two of us. Somewhere quiet. No phones. No updates. No family obligations. When we came back, I felt lighter in a way that had nothing to do with victory. I felt detached. And detachment, I learned, is sometimes the healthiest response of all. By early fall, the consequences started catching up to Jessica in ways she could no longer redirect. The building management processed my removal from her lease. She received a formal notice. Marcus didn't step in. Whatever connection they'd maintained finally collapsed under the weight of reality. My mother let it slip during an awkward phone call that Jessica had moved back in with them temporarily, the same word we'd all been using for years. This time, it sounded less convincing. Jessica tried to save face online. inspirational quotes, photos at cafes, captions about independence and new beginnings. But behind the scenes, she wasn't in school. She wasn't stable. She was scrambling, and for the first time, no one was scrambling on her behalf. The family drifted into an uneasy truce. Invitations dried up. Group messages stayed silent. I could feel myself being recast as the black sheep, the one who broke the unspoken rule of endless accommodation. When my husband joked about it, I surprised myself by agreeing. Being the black sheep felt better than being the family's ATM. The invitation to dinner came weeks later, casual and carefully worded. My parents were hosting. Just immediate family and a few relatives. Nothing big. My husband asked if I thought it was a setup. I said yes, and we went anyway. I was tired of guessing. Jessica was already there when we arrived, seated between my mother and an uncle, hair done, posture composed, like she was auditioning for normalcy. The room went quiet for half a second, then resumed its forced cheer. We sat. Food was served. Everyone talked around the obvious like it was a fragile object no one wanted to touch. Halfway through the meal, Jessica spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look at me. "I just want to say I'm sorry," she said. Forks froze midair. "I shouldn't have ruined your dinner or done some of the other things." That was it. No specifics, no ownership. Just a vague apology, carefully crafted to move the night along. My mother smiled at me hopefully, waiting for me to complete the ritual and absolve her. I didn't. I nodded once and said, "Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it." The conversation resumed like nothing had happened. That was the family's version of closure. The rest of the night passed without incident. As we were leaving, I noticed Jessica never once congratulated us on our marriage, never asked about the trip we'd taken, never acknowledged anything beyond her own survival. 2 weeks later, I learned she had quietly registered her own marriage. No ceremony, no announcement, just paperwork. My mother mentioned it in passing like it was an afterthought. I didn't react. I didn't need to. By then, I understood something clearly. She had finally gotten what she wanted, and so had I. The quiet didn't last. It just changed shape. One morning at work, an email landed in my inbox from the financial aid office at Jessica's college, written in that careful, professional tone that assumes cooperation. They were reaching out to confirm a financial responsibility agreement for Jessica's fall semester, noting that I was listed as the payer and that a signed authorization was on file. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, something left over from the years when I actually had been paying. Then I opened the attachment. It was a PDF, my name typed neatly at the bottom, my signature scrawled above it. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close enough to fool someone who didn't know me, but wrong in all the ways that mattered. She had forged it. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, my brain trying to catch up to the reality of what I was looking at. Smashing a glass at a dinner was one thing. Screaming in my living room was another. But this crossed out of family dysfunction and into something colder. This wasn't desperation. This was fraud. I called the financial aid office immediately and explained calmly that I had not signed anything and that the document was falsified. They didn't sound shocked. Apparently, this wasn't unheard of. They flagged the account, froze the processing, and asked me to submit a formal statement. I did. Then I forwarded the entire thread to my personal email and closed my laptop. I didn't tell my husband right away, not because I was hiding it, but because I needed a minute to sit with the weight of it alone. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "You're really going to leave me with nothing?" No apology, no explanation, just accusation. I didn't respond. That evening, my father showed up at our door by himself. He looked older than he had a week earlier, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. He said Jessica hadn't told them what had happened, only that things had gotten worse and that she was scared. He asked if we could talk. We sat on the porch, the same porch where he used to lecture me about responsibility and patience. After a while, he added something quietly, like he didn't want my mother to hear it. "She tried to move money out of your mother's account," he said. "Said it was an accident, that she thought it was hers." He shook his head slowly. "We're starting to see things more clearly now." I told him about the forged form. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend her. He just nodded, thanked me for telling him, and left. That was the moment I knew something fundamental had shifted. They weren't asking me to fix it anymore. They were finally admitting there was something wrong. Jessica's next move was more public. She showed up at my husband's office unannounced, walked into the lobby, and asked to see him about urgent family business. Security stopped her before she made it past the desk. He stayed in his office until they escorted her out. She texted me afterward, furious, accusing me of turning everyone against her, of making her look unstable, of ruining her life. I didn't reply, neither did he. That night, my husband and I sat at the kitchen table and made a decision without drama. We canceled our postponed wedding plans entirely. No ceremony, no reschedule, no attempt to reclaim a day that had already been tainted. We registered our marriage officially and booked a quiet weekend away, just the two of us. When he asked if I was okay being the black sheep of the family for a while, I surprised myself by smiling. I told him I already had been. I'd just been too busy paying for everything to notice. The fallout rippled outward slowly. Jessica tried to disappear for a while, then resurfaced with inspirational quotes and carefully curated photos about new beginnings. Meanwhile, the lease removal processed. A 30-day notice followed. Marcus didn't step in. Whatever arrangement they'd been clinging to collapsed under the weight of reality. My mother eventually admitted that Jessica had moved back in with them, temporarily, of course. The word sounded as hollow as it always had. I stayed quiet. I went to work. I came home. My life felt strangely calm, like the noise that had been humming in the background for years had finally shut off. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. The invitation came when I wasn't expecting it, dressed up as something casual. A family dinner at my parents' house. Nothing big, just immediate family and a few relatives. My husband raised an eyebrow when I showed him the message and asked if I thought it was a setup. I told him yes, and we went anyway. I was tired of pretending I didn't know how these things worked. The moment we walked in, the air told me everything. Everyone was already seated. Jessica sat between my mother and one of our uncles, hair done, posture perfect, looking like someone rehearsing normalcy. The room went quiet for half a second, then snapped back into forced conversation. We sat down. Plates were passed. Wine was poured. No one mentioned the dinner she'd destroyed, the forged form, or the scene at my husband's office. It was like the family had agreed on collective amnesia. Halfway through the meal, Jessica spoke. Not loudly, not emotionally. She didn't even look at me. "I just want to say I'm sorry," she said. Forks froze. "I shouldn't have ruined your dinner or done some of the other things. Vague, bloodless, safe." My mother looked at me with that hopeful smile I'd seen 100 times, the one that asked me to make it okay for everyone. I didn't. I nodded once and said, "Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it." And then I went back to eating. The conversation lurched forward, relieved, as if that was all the ritual required. That was their version of resolution. A sentence, a nod, permission to move on. The rest of the night passed quietly. As we were leaving, I noticed something small and telling. Jessica never congratulated us on our marriage, never asked about our weekend away, never acknowledged anything that wasn't about her survival. 2 weeks later, my mother mentioned in passing that Jessica had quietly registered her own marriage. No ceremony, no celebration, just paperwork. I let it go. I didn't need to react to everything anymore. Weeks later, my father called again to invite us to my mother's birthday dinner. Jessica would be there, he said quickly, like he was bracing for resistance. We went. The restaurant was quiet, the kind of place people choose when they want the evening to feel civil. Jessica and her new husband were already seated when we arrived. She nodded at us. That was it. Dinner was polite, rehearsed, safe. My aunt raised a glass and said she was grateful we were all together after everything. Jessica's husband added something about forgiveness and families knowing how to move on. Their clean slate, offered without substance. I smiled, said I was glad things were better, and didn't correct anyone. We left early. On the drive home, my husband asked how I felt. I told him the truth. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel relieved. I felt neutral. And in families like mine, neutrality is the closest thing to peace you're going to get. I understand now that some families don't resolve conflict. They absorb it, smooth it over, and pretend it never happened. They choose surface harmony over accountability. I can live with that as long as they don't expect me to forget. Jessica finally got what she wanted. support, a place to land, a version of life that looked acceptable from the outside. And I got what I wanted too: freedom, clear boundaries, a marriage built on honesty instead of obligation. The spell was broken. I wasn't picking up the pieces anymore, and that, more than anything, felt like winning.